You're listening to the Fan to Fan podcast, and today we're talking video store memories. Here we go. Welcome to the Fan to Fan podcast. This is your host, Bernie Gonzalez, and I am here with friend, fan, and fellow podcaster, Pete Charbonneau. Pete, how are you doing today?
I am outstanding, Bernie. Thank you once again for having me on the podcast. It's always a pleasure, and looking forward to this episode.
Oh, thank you for joining me. Thank you for being gracious. Pete's joined me on quite a few episodes along with his partner in crime, John Szyminski. Together they have the So Bad It's ... podcast.
You can follow us on @SoBadcast on Twitter. Get involved in the conversation. We're always looking for other prerogatives, perspectives, or if you want to agree with us, we are perfectly okay with that too.
I usually tend to agree with you guys because you guys have a great podcast.
That's why we get along so well.
Doing it. Exactly. And we have a lot of very similar memories in growing up, Pete. You and I do. This episode's theme will be, I think, right up our alley because we're talking about video store memories. And we come from an era where video stores were a thing. I think now with the widespread availability of cable, movie channel options, streaming options, even mail services, they're all competitive. They're all changing the face of entertainment, the accessibility of entertainment. So we're kind of hearkening back to an era where all of that accessibility was not there, and it required a little extra effort. As someone who was just trying to see a movie, it was not necessarily a button away.
Exactly. I was thinking about it a little bit, in advance of coming on here, and just how different it seems 20 years ago what was needed to catch a recent movie. You didn't have streaming services. You didn't have the availability on your personal computer to watch essentially any movie, TV show, what have you, whenever you wanted to. You had to wait. If it was a movie, you had to wait several months before it hit the video market. They were not cheap for a long time. I can remember hearing advertisements for movies coming out that had, if it had been a blockbuster, I can't think of a specific film, but it would be $50 or $60 to get the VHS tape when it was initially released. And that, when you're 12, 13, 14, 15 years old, as you and I were back in the heyday of video stores, that was not chump change, and that was not money that we readily had available. So, yeah, it took a little bit of an effort. It took a little ingenuity, but at the same time, I fondly recall a lot of hidden gems. I was turned on to a lot of different movies. I was turned on to, or at least had some of my music tastes validated, or a bit of a musical epiphany through video stores. And I would love to talk to you about your memories as well. Let's just get into some of our fond memories and some stories and see where our touch points intersect once again.
So it's easy now where you can just jump on Amazon Prime or Hulu and sign up for an account. And I thought we would start off our walk down memory lane with just setting up an account at a video store, because it was not as easy as going to a login page, filling out some profile information, filling out an information screen. To set up an account at a video store, people will have different recollections based on when they have their video store memories, whether they were towards the beginning in the late 70s into the early 80s, or into middle end of the 90s, where video stores were starting to dissipate a bit. But setting up an account required getting contact information, some form of identification, credit card. But I mean, you were creating a membership to a club, because that's what a lot of these video stores were. They were video store clubs, and you would pay this membership fee, which could be $50, $100 a year, and then on top of that, paying for your rental.
Exactly. Yeah, I had completely forgotten about the whole membership club, but that's the perfect way to put it. You were a part of a video membership club.
If you think $2 can't buy you much entertainment anymore, take a look at what Arrow's Video Club members are watching tonight. Trading Places, War Games, Michael Jackson's Thriller, Raiders of the Lost Ark, and Tootsie. Membership is just $15, and lets your whole family enjoy some of the finest video entertainment available anywhere. Over 1,600 titles, each for rent at just $2 the first night and only $1 each extra night. Visit any of the convenient Arrow's Video Clubs soon.
I can't remember the name of the first place that we got a membership at. It was a tiny little hole-in-the-wall mom-and-pop store, but I do remember that their deal was for $100 year-long membership, you got the first couple of movies rented for free. So that was their enticing pitch to you. But still, $100 a year just for a membership. And when you kind of fast forward into the heyday of Blockbuster, they were practically giving that stuff away like candy because it was more about driving the rentals, and that model kind of shifted. But when it was first starting out, you had to pay that money up front on top of renting movies. And it was a bit of a novelty thing. I remember our first VCR it basically was essentially what the machine was. It was just like a giant cassette player and looked, for all intents and purposes, like a blown-up cassette player because it played a giant cassette in our minds in the early 80s. So just a really bizarre time, and I know a younger generation might have a hard time kind of fathoming what that looks like or what that means given the ease of distribution of video these days. But it was an event. It was an event going to the video store.
Do you remember how old you were when you guys got a VCR in the home?
It was definitely early 80s, early to mid 80s, I would say, when we got the first one. It was weird. My dad was an electrician, and back then they were the early adopters for so much stuff, and now they're the exact opposite. Now I remember even trying to get an answering machine in the home. My mom was paranoid about the fact that there was going to be some little micro cassette with our voice recording on it if we happened to not be there to answer the phone on time. So, but back in the day, my dad, we got like an early Commodore 64, which was so cutting edge back in the day. He would be the first to get us like the Atari 2600. He had this thing called the Telestar Ranger, which is one of the first ever video game console systems he picked up. He got us free cable as an electrician. He'd bring home illegal cable boxes, and it was awesome.
So did you guys have beta and VHS, or just VHS?
No, we did not have beta.
Okay.
I was talking to John, my So Bad Cast colleague, about this because his dad was convinced that beta was going to be the way to go. And for those that...
So did Sony.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. And for those that don't know or don't remember, there was a time where VHS or beta, which is actually the name of a pretty good indie band, by the way, that was the big... It was kind of like the...
DivX DVD argument where...
Yeah, exactly. The CD plus and minus, and it was which technology was going to win out, and the Betamax users lost pretty handily on that one to VHS.
Yeah, because it was a Matsushita that made the VHS machines, but they had kind of this open standard so other companies could make VHS machines, which just made VHS tapes more widespread, versus Sony, which produced and had really tight control over beta. And then I do remember a time where I would go to the video store and, maybe next to the same movie, you would see The Firm on VHS, and right next to it you would see The Firm on beta, or they might even have a whole section separated just for beta, but the beta section always had a more limited selection compared to VHS tapes.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So you mentioned going to the store. So New Movie Tuesdays, that's a big recollection that I think stands to date, and I'm sure there's probably this very long history on why the movie/entertainment industry has decided to make Tuesdays the date to release new CDs, video games, or movies. But, as I got older and then I started to realize, if today I'm off from school or I'm in college and classes are optional, I can just go to the video store first and get that new copy of Highlander 2, the Renegade Edition, before anyone else gets it. But Tuesdays were a big deal, along with days like Fridays and Saturday nights where it was crowded and, the new releases were out of stock and you'd have to ask the clerk if someone returned a movie. You would check that recently returned stack with a cart, and you were annoying the clerk, but, you were just trying to get that movie to watch with your buddies. Or if the clerk was nice enough, then you would just check the cart yourself. So it was a destination, whether it was Tuesday or the weekend.
Your video store carries a wide selection of films, adventures, dramas, mysteries, comedies, classics, and children's fare. Don't hesitate to ask your video retailer for suggestions. In addition to the movies you already know, he can recommend many lesser-known films you're bound to enjoy. Remember, great entertainment awaits you, weekends and weekdays.
Yeah, it was such a weird, because especially early on, again, there was this place, On Real Video. That was my favorite video store, and unfortunately it wind up succumbing to the advent of Blockbuster, and Blockbuster just kind of took over the whole scene. But for a couple of years, that was the place where me and my friends, we would walk to. If my parents couldn't give us a ride there, it was maybe like a 20-minute walk to from my house. So it was always the walk there was always, what are we going to get? We got to figure out maybe the type of movie we want to get. We're going to go horror, we're going to go sci-fi, we're going to go comedy. We felt we needed to have a plan going in because, like you said, depending on what day it was, you're going to be out of luck if you got there at the wrong time. And I'm curious to know if any of the video stores that you went to growing up as a kid, if they had certain systems. And again, this is before Blockbuster, where you would walk in and there would be a wall of new releases and there'd be like 30 copies of a particular movie. This was back, if you were lucky if a store had 2 or 3 copies of a movie. So if you didn't get there, you're out of luck and you had to go, to option B, C, or even D sometimes. So I'm just curious if you had those stores that you went to had any kind of system for letting you know what was in and what was not.
No, I mean, I remember the mom and pop video stores, and kind of going in I guess historical sense, every video store I knew at first was a mom and pop store, whether it was freestanding, whether it was inside a grocery store, a drugstore, even a record store, because we had some stores around us like that had a few tapes, and then a grocery store you would go to that might have a small section towards the customer service desk that might have like 20 or 30 copies of would-be new releases, and they might keep a few, and obviously they'd get older, but you would still be able to watch Terminator or Predator or Die Hard. But I think the best memory I had was always they would have the little tags at the mom and pop stores for new releases, but I would always gravitate to the recommendations. And that's at a time when the clerks were really the gateway towards discovery. And this is, high school age, so I'm maybe between 12 and 16 when tapes are at their prime, when you can go into a Blockbuster or Hollywood Video, Family Video, and rent anything. So unfortunately, some of those mom and pop stores disappeared, but those are the memories that I have best of interacting in a video store, where I would go in, check out a clerk's recommendation shelf, and if that staff member happened to recommend something that I liked before, then I might check that out. But that's how I discovered movies like Evil Dead and Fright Night and Return of the Living Dead. There was always that one clerk that you would walk in and just be like, oh, I've got to check out and see what Steve has on his shelf, because Steve has some really cool stuff that I like, and that's how I discovered Highlander. Mm-hmm. But those were kind of, the hidden systems that were there before you started going into a Blockbuster, and it was easy to dissect it. Here's horror, here's sci-fi, here's the new release shelf, here's 100 copies of a new release movie, and it's fairly easy to find. The hidden gems were in those mom and pop stores.
Yeah, and I think that's really interesting that your stores had that, that clerk suggestion wall. Unreal, where I went to and spent most of my video renting days, was so tiny that it didn't have room for that. There was I remember there was a small wall right next to the register that had, Nintendo games where you could rent games, which for whatever reason, we didn't rent too many video games back then. We had them, but we didn't rent them.
Here's big news for kids. Nintendo, loaded with surprises. Nintendo, packed with punch. Nintendo. Now rent a wide variety of Nintendo games at Major Video, the Super Video Store.
There was basically, it was maybe, if I'm being generous, maybe 1/15 the size of a standard Blockbuster. So it was just tiny. There were 2 towers in the middle of the store, and then there were videos on either wall of the store. And the towers, you could kind of go as like a cube. So you go around 4 panels to see what videos they had, and those tended to be the new releases. And then the wall was more or less broken up into genres. And the clerks, although I remember them being very friendly, and I remember them knowing who we were not actively out there kind of really helping. Once in a while we would go up to the counter and ask if something wasn't in, if they had it, or if someone had just returned it, like you mentioned. But Unreal had their system where they had these little green tags in front of the movie box, and that's how you knew a movie was in. If there was a green tag there, you grabbed the tag, which had a number on it. You brought it up to the front, and then they would, they'd have all the VHS tapes in these sliding drawers, and then they would put it into one of those clear plastic VHS cases, and then you would take it out of the store with you. So it was always the mad dash to go into a certain section and then look to see if the green tag was there. And if it wasn't, then all right, you have to look for something else. And in a weird way, that was part of the fun. It was always kind of, is it going to be there? Is this movie going to be there? It was something I can remember my friends and I staring across at the various Faces of Death movies, because that was one of those taboo ones that it took a long time for us to work up the courage to rent, because even though our parents kind of gave us free reign to go and rent what we wanted, we also knew that they were waiting back at home, and if we showed up with Faces of Death and they heard that on while we were downstairs, that was probably going to get us in some kind of trouble. So we needed to be strategic about when we rented our first Faces of Death video. But that was, that was part of the excitement. You had these movies that you had heard about from either older cousins or older brothers or sisters, what have you, and there they were, like right before you, and it was always that temptation of like, is today the day we're going to rent it and see what this is all about. It was oddly exciting for a 14-year-old kid.
Well, that was I think that's probably my biggest video store memory, and maybe not one specific memory per se, but just the idea of discovery, where you could go down an aisle where you're just discovering new things that maybe you don't necessarily know about, but you've heard of. But that's how I discovered new movies. You were taking a risk. You were renting blindly, and sometimes you were completely burned. You would come home and realize, wait a second, this sudden death movie is basically just a ripoff of Die Hard, but with Jean-Claude Van Damme. But this is awful. No, I don't want to watch this. No, so you'd get burned a few times, but occasionally, you would get that one movie that would just make an impression. I still remember first time renting Highlander. Mm-hmm. First of all, it's Queen. It was the music was amazing. First CD I ever bought, actually, A Kind of Magic by Queen. But just the movie itself, the idea, the topic, and as a teenager, a young teenager at that, it was a perfect idea, a perfect concept for me to take in. So I was excited to find that next Highlander. What other movie was like that I'd not watched? And then, too, kind of revisiting movies that, like you said, I remember when Batman came out and I wanted that on VHS, going to a mom and pop video store and asking how much it would cost to buy it. And it was like $80. Mm-hmm. And this was, at a time before, well, maybe at a time when you had Suncoast and a few things, but well before the Best Buys. But you would go to a Suncoast and the movies would be expensive. So it's not like you could go out and buy a copy of Highlander or Batman. Even if you liked the movie, your options were to continue to rent it over and over and over again. But that's how you would kind of discover these movies. And if you hadn't seen it in a while, you could go back and revisit it.
Yeah, and it was, I don't know if stores did that on purpose, to kind of jacked up the prices on owning it to kind of drive that rental model or what. But I think the only VHS tape that I ever spent, that top dollar on, and I'm not still to this day sure why I did it. I mean, I know why that I was a fan, but when U2's Rattle and Hum came out, that was another one. It was like $60 or $70, and I didn't see it in the theater, but I had just gotten into that type of music, and I'm like, I need to own this. I need to have this in my house and not just come and rent it. And I remember saving up my lawn mowing money, whatever money I had on me, and I went down and I bought it, and I thought it was like the greatest purchase to date of my life, because I was spending $50 or $60 on a VHS tape, which now sounds completely ridiculous, but that was the standard back then.
In a few seconds, Pete and I will continue our discussion on video store memories. But in the meantime, remember you can find the Fan to Fan podcast at www.fanpodcast.com. Facebook, just search Fan to Fan Podcast. That's FAN, the number 2, FAN, or on Twitter at Fan to Fan Podcast. I'd love to hear from you, so reach out, send the message, and let me know what you think of the show. Thanks.
And now, on with the show.
Do you remember ever going to the video store and going through their previously viewed VHS tapes and just finding that one movie that you loved that was finally at a respectable price that you could pull the trigger on, take it home, and after dropping maybe $10, $20, having rented it over and over and over again, it was finally sitting on your shelf?
Again, and this was part of the musical epiphanies. One that I did buy was the Standing on the Beach video, which was the Cure's singles or their videos, and it was a compilation. They came out with like a CD that was like their singles to that point and a bunch of B-sides, which was fantastic. And then they had the video collection of all their videos up to that point. And again, this was a band that I just gotten into. I used to listen to a lot of like cheesy heavy metal because I grew up on Long Island, and that's essentially what you did being a white suburban boy. And then my first girlfriend's older brother got me turned on to this other type of music. And I'm like, oh, wow. And I remember renting it from Unreal Video, and which I think, again, was another cool thing that got lost when the Blockbusters and Hollywood Videos came along, is you had, even though the stores were small, you had this eclectic selection of music videos, movies that kind of disappeared a little bit when it became a little more sanitized, I guess might be a word for it.
Well, sure, because at that point they're appealing to the masses, so we have to have 100 copies of Terminator 2, and
right.
we can't afford to have a section for music videos. And you started to see those special interest areas start to dwindle, so you wouldn't have documentaries, not just music videos, but documentaries and workout videos, all the stuff that you would find. But now there were less because you had to have 100 copies of Independence Day or whatever it was.
Right, yeah. And even though Blockbuster was so much more larger than the mom and pop stores, a lot of that space was taken up, like you said, like it was the sheer volume of new releases. It was 3 walls of new releases and however many copies of those new release tapes. And then the other sections just kind of kept dwindling and dwindling. So I don't recall getting any of those bargain bin finds of a movie that I needed to own. If anything, it turned me on to some films that I bought, maybe not at the video store, but I had bought at other times. I mean, Dawn of the Dead, the original Dawn of the Dead, my parents actually rented, and to this day I'm not sure why, because they're not necessarily horror movie fans. I'm guessing it was because they probably enjoyed Night of the Living Dead at some point and figured, oh, here's the sequel, let's give that a try. But my brother and I kind of usurped that tape, because back then you got them for a couple of days. You could rent them for like 2 or 3 days before you had to return it. And that
one was a two tape one, right? If I remember it.
It might have been. Yeah, because it was a long movie. That was like 2.5 hours at least, I think. And they had watched it on the Friday night, and then on Saturday, my brother and I were like, oh, well, let's check this out. And our minds were completely blown because of the gore factor and we were like, and just the whole, for a kid,
it's an 80s wet dream. You're going to get stuck in a mall and you can do whatever you want.
Exactly. I mean, they're just right there. That just hit a complete nerve with my brother and I. Were like, this is the most amazing movie we've ever seen. And that probably started my slight fascination with, I wonder what it would be like to live in a dystopian future, and would I really not mind it so badly?
It comes at the cost of the undead coming back to life, but it's a small price to pay if you can have an entire mall to yourself.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, just kind of wandering through shops, and I mean, Dawn of the Dead had its own ice rink, which was fantastic. I mean, that might have been the greatest.
Always remember that. Yes, one of the things on my fan bucket list is to go to that mall.
Oh, the Monroeville
and
Mall. Yeah.
Oh, see, there you go. Have you ever been?
I have not. I've thought about it. I've never. I think any time that I've been close to traveling through Pennsylvania, it hasn't been on my mind. I think that would be kind of cool because it does still exist. I think it's still an operating mall, if I'm not mistaken.
I think that's setting up a potential hit TV series that we can do on the Travel Channel or something, or Discovery Channel, Pete, where we do like Nerd Trip, where we start on one coast, hit your old stomping grounds in the East Coast, and go through any place that's a staple of a genre film. Every place that you can imagine, from one side all the way to the Goonies house, in, I want to say it's Oregon.
It is, yeah. John's actually been there. He went out a couple of years ago for, I think it was the 20th anniversary of Goonies. They have like a little Goonie fest that goes on out there that he went to. So he actually got to see the house. And I am down for that. And to tie this back in a little bit to the video store thing, I remember when I got to college, I remember having a membership to a local video store at college, but I don't remember really using it more than once or twice. And one time that I did was for a communications paper that I needed to do, where I essentially talked about 3 generations of hockey movies using Slapshot, Youngblood, and the Mighty Ducks. So Slapshot in the 70s, Youngblood in the 80s, Mighty Ducks in the 90s, and how it depicted different eras of hockey. And I never returned. I think I rented I think it was Slapshot, and I never returned it. And then right before I graduated, I went back, and I had rung up like $50 worth of late fees, and I don't know why I should not have even brought it back at that point. But that wasn't the point of my aside. one of the other times that we did rent something from the video store was around Halloween, and we rented the Amityville Horror. And I went to school on Long Island, and I went to Hofstra, which was about a 20-minute drive from Amityville. And so we kind of tied that in. I remember my freshman year, we had a bunch of people. We lived in a co-ed freshman dorm, so we had guys and girls, and watched the Amityville Horror, got a little bit spooked out, and I'm like, hey, I know where that house is. And then we just packed a caravan of a couple of cars. We drove to Amityville. I used to be, when I was younger, slightly obsessed with it, so I had read the book. I kind of knew that it was on Ocean Avenue. We had a map. We found it, found the house. There were other people wandering around because it was around Halloween, and that's kind of what you did. We didn't loiter on the property or anything like that. We kind of just walked up and down the street and like, oh yeah, there it is, and then went back to our dorms. But that was just kind of one of those fun little things that I won't say that a video store contributed to. I mean, it contributed that we went and rented the movie, but it just kind of ties into that whole memory thing of growing up around those times and how things kind of interacted through that. And again, you had to do a little more legwork to experience things like that. You couldn't just look it up on your phone. Someone like myself, being a little crazy about Amityville Horror, had to have that knowledge of where to go, and then we took off and did it, and it was a fun little night. So
save more at Video Time. Rent 3 new releases, get the 4th one free. And now enjoy all your movies for 3 evenings. Video Time has 50-cent cartoons and discounts for seniors. Video Time, with 17 locations, there's one near you.
It's a big progression to go from your parents having a video store membership, and maybe you get to the point where they trust you enough, as a young adult, to put you on the list so you can rent movies yourself, to actually being in college where, you can rent the movies that you wanted to watch completely independent of your parents. It's kind of like it's dismissive to think of video stores as something of a bygone era, but it's the kind of stuff that you and I grew up with that actually was kind of there as we were growing up.
Sure. And I was going to ask, did your parents give any restrictions to you as far as like going to the store and getting movies? Were they strict at all like that, or did you kind of have carte blanche to rent what you wanted to?
No, I am glad that my parents were absolutely careless in letting me rent whatever I wanted to. And my brother, who's a few years younger, he was essentially exposed to anything I was watching. So if I was watching Batman the Animated Series, then he was forced to watch it, and then he grew to enjoy it. But he was way too young to watch Terminator or let alone any of the full moon movies that I was watching towards the early 90s, like the Bad Channels and Dollman, Demonic Toys, things that he was way too young to watch, but movies that my parents had no idea. And if I did not show them the cover, and this is a part too, is some of the best memories I have in video stores were those covers. And if I was with my folks and they saw the cover for, any of those full moon movies that just had, something on there, I mean, like Demonic Toys or something, or Ghoulies or anything like that, they might be more adverse to letting me rent it. But if I just came home with this completely innocuous black tape that if they never saw the scary font on the thing, they would not know what it was. So I'd just make sure to try to watch it when they weren't around and really use the pause and change inputs as quickly as possible just to make sure that we could watch the movie. But yeah, no, I was grateful that they did not have limitations, and it allowed me to see a lot of movies that I was definitely not ready for, that I know for a fact my brother wasn't ready for. But, it just exposed us to that. And then going back to it, some of the best VHS covers that I remember were all low-budget sci-fi horror films that you strictly discovered because they had great VHS cover images. That was that was competitive. You had no clue what you were getting in the movie, whether it was going to be a Troma production or whether it was going to be, something with a bigger budget. But here you are thinking, oh, this is a great cover. I've got to check this out. And then you go home and realize, oh, this is just a poor man's Indiana Jones. I should have just rented Indiana Jones. That would have been a better night.
Right, instead of Alan Quatermain and the Lost City of Gold.
There you go, yes. Or that really terrible, what's the Chuck Norris movie?
Oh, God, yes.
Is it, I was going to say Firestarter, but I feel like Firewalker, maybe?
Firewalker, yeah. Yep.
Okay.
You got it. Yeah.
No, kids don't rent Firewalker. You're not ready for Firewalker.
Ever.
No one is ready. Ever. No.
No, you are so right. You basically took the words right out of my mouth. I mean, kudos to whoever was writing the backs of these, cassette tapes, the boxes, because unless you had someone give you some inside information or you had heard about a film that you hadn't seen that intrigued you, the video box cover and the description on the back was what was selling you on buying or renting that movie. And that was essentially all that you had to go on. And that was what was capturing your imagination. And I'd say, 8 out of 10 times, it wasn't, the actual movie that you rented was not going to live up to the hype of what you had in your head. I think you, or like me, we had some pretty active imagination. So you're reading something on the back and like, this movie is going to be the greatest thing I've ever seen. And then you pop it in and it's a low budget, Troma production or something like that. And you're like, oh, this movie kind of sucks. This is so
that's when you saw all those knockoffs of blockbuster films that always had those forgotten actors or TV actors, all the straight to video movies that were out there, that were not nearly as good as the major Hollywood studio equivalent that you were hoping it was like.
Right.
In a few seconds, Pete and I will conclude our walk down video store memory lane. But in the meantime, if you are listening on iTunes, please take a moment to rate and review. Just search for the Fan to Fan podcast, go under reviews, enter a star rating, or write a review if you have a second or two, and click send. That's how easy it is. I will greatly appreciate it. Thanks.
Now, did you have any of those gems is there anything that sticks in your mind of something that you rented almost on a whim and really exceeded your expectations and became like a favorite movie of yours?
It has to be Evil Dead. I rented Evil Dead and Evil Dead 2, Dead by Dawn, on the same night. And I was visiting my girlfriend at the time, and we were trying to figure out what to do. I'd driven from my college to her college when we kind of went to this really small mom and pop video store in the back of, if I remember correctly, it was the back of a liquor store. It doesn't get any better than that. A video store in the back of a liquor store where I probably imagine the only person of age would have been the clerk. So you have all these people probably renting movies with a legitimate ID and yet buying alcohol with a fake ID. But nonetheless, it's like, oh, let me go back to my wallet and find that other ID that I'm going to give you. But I just remember getting Evil Dead 1 and 2 on a whim, thinking, let's watch something scary.
Yep.
And just being completely surprised by discovering something new and spending more time watching the movie. I was paying more attention to the movies. And then immediately after we were done watching the first one, and I thought, this is terrific. I can't wait to watch the next one. And wait, I think back on that shelf, they had some other movie that was a part of this called Army of Darkness. You know what? You order pizza. I'm going to run back and get that one. And then getting Army of Darkness, coming back, and then watching Evil Dead 2 and Army of Darkness. And again, to this day, great memory because it opened a brand new door, introduced me to Sam Raimi, Bruce Campbell, Ash in that world. That's how I discovered the Evil Dead series.
Yeah, I was same thing with the Evil Dead. That was something that I can remember it being on my conscious. This is something I need to check out, and I don't know why, because I don't know if I knew anyone that had seen it, but I had heard from school or overheard someone rumbling about it that it was like this crazy, gnarly series of movies. And so, yeah, and I think that might have been even before Army of Darkness came out. It was right around, I think Evil Dead and Evil Dead 2 were out, but maybe before Army of Darkness came out. So that was another one, kind of like Faces of Death, although Faces of Death was just completely bizarre when I finally saw it. But Evil Dead was one of those, when we finally rented it, we're like, oh, okay, this is just completely gross out, but it's also kind of hysterical. And then, I started my, bromance with Bruce Campbell along with a lot of other people. So
all Warehouse Record and Video stores have a sensational video rental program. Right now, rent the movies of your choice for only $2 per movie per day. That's right, $2 per day. Hundreds to choose from, including Raging Bull, Ordinary People, Airplane, Coming Home, Fame, Superman the Movie, The Jazz Singer with Neil Diamond, or many other great movies on video at only $2 per movie per day. Why not see the movies of your choice at home tonight? Where? At the Warehouse.
There was one my cousin growing up, my cousin Mark and I are a couple of months apart, and his parents were extremely strict. My parents were fairly strict, but I somehow got away with watching like a lot of horror movies. And he was not allowed to watch any at all because I think he used to get nightmares. So I think they kind of shielded him from that. And so when he got a little bit older, all he wanted to do was rent horror movies. And that's all we did. Like we would take turns having sleepovers at each other's houses because we lived like a half hour apart. And that's
probably another good memory, just picking up like a stack of movies for
absolutely.
Your sleepover, right?
There you go. Yeah, we would basically each have a handful of horror movies, take it back to our house, and then just be, sleeping bags on the basement floor, TV, set up, and we would just watch horror movies all night until we passed out, and it was great. And there was one time we were upstate New York at my grandparents had this farmhouse in this valley, and not a ton to do up there, and so we got my aunt or uncle to take us to the video store, and this was one of those random things that we rented. I specifically remember this. We rented the original Longest Yard with Burt Reynolds. And I don't know why we picked that because we were still kind of young, but because we rented that to this day is one of my favorite movies. I just love it. And then we also rented this really bad horror movie called Witchboard that starred Tawny Katane from the Whitesnake videos and the guy that played Patch from Days of Our Lives. So,
wow.
But the crazy thing is that if we were to watch it today, and if anyone were to see it today, they would be like, this is a total piece of crap. It makes no sense. It's really dumb. But again, because it was that night and something about that time, remember we watched it and we're like, yeah, that was kind of cool. There were like some twists in there. That was pretty good. We like actually went away from that thinking that it was a really good movie. It's a movie that in no way would have held up over the next 20 years, but maybe it was just the time and place that solidified it for us. But in that moment, we're like, yeah, that was a pretty good horror movie. And it's not. It's not a pretty good horror movie.
No.
It's an awful horror movie.
That's what a lot of those movies were. You reminded me that's how I discovered Dead Alive. So that was my first interaction with Peter Jackson before he did any of the Lord of the Rings movies. But again, a movie that I had no expectation for, thought was interesting. But that's another part of video stores is that actually gave a fighting chance for movies that had a limited or overshadowed theatrical run. So you would have movies like The Thing and even more contemporary movies like Boondock Saints that it seems like it would be a success, but on the contrary, it did not do very well into theaters, but gained popularity due to the home video market. And that's what video stores were. They were an opportunity for some of these movies to actually gain some fandom and to get folks to watch them. And that's where they became popular. I mean, The Thing was overshadowed by E.T., and Pete and I actually talked about that in a previous episode, so check that one out. But that's one of those movies that, again, discovered in colleges and mom and pop video stores, and then just became this cult classic.
Absolutely. Yeah. I don't know. I still continue to look back when I do on that whole time very fondly. It just the amount of things that it exposed me to, most of them great. There were definitely some stinkers in there. I think Rowdy Roddy Piper and Hell Comes to Frogtown comes to mind as one of those type movies. And, you could get away with it, be like, oh no, this Rowdy Roddy Piper's in it. It's like a sci-fi. It's just an action movie. Don't worry about it. All right, yeah, you can go enjoy Rowdy Roddy Piper. Oh, I will.
I always thought that one NES game was actually an adaptation of that movie with the Bayou Billy. I always thought Bayou Billy was an adaptation of Hell Comes to Frogtown, just because I saw the movie poster for that and wearing this vest, and he looks like it's some sort of bayou or some sort of, like Louisiana backwoods swampy type area. Oh, that's cool. So, he must be Billy. And then to realize two completely different things.
Yes. Yeah, two completely different things.
That's the power of video stores. They had the ability to create this whole world that just allowed us to discover so much more than it was just a different time. And I think that's the part, again, that I miss is just the idea of discovery and being able to be exposed to all of these movies that I would not seek out. And now having, I guess, a version of that in, I'll get an email from Netflix that says, hey, you saw Black Mirror, you may like Twilight Zone. Mm-hmm. I wanted to get into the more esoteric stuff, the stuff that is not easy to find, that you'd have to dig through a shelf to find that one horror sci-fi movie and just realize, wow, I haven't seen Ice Pirates in forever. I want to rent this. Or finding, again, a trauma film like Cannibal the Musical and saying, all right, well, I saw Toxic Crusader, same guys, I'll give this a shot. I think that's the part I missed the most, that tangibility of being able to say, hey, I discovered something new, let's give this a shot for a few bucks and see what happens.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's, there was like the soft sell that you had to give to your friends. Like if you wanted to see something and they may have been leaning another way, there was a little bit of the diplomatic back and forth of, hey, why don't we try this time, or as opposed to, oh no, I was thinking of sci-fi. Like, I was really thinking I wanted to go horror tonight, so we should maybe look at this. And
getting the merit badge too. If you had suggested a good movie, then you might get a bit more leeway next time. It's like,
exactly,
Pete dropped that gem last time and we love that, so this time around, Pete, go ahead, recommend Jack Frost 2.
Yeah, sadly enough, Jack Frost was a movie that I remember a bunch of friends and I rented at a Blockbuster, and we were just severely angry. And of course, I'm speaking of the bad horror movie, not the Michael Keaton
vehicle. No, which did not have a sequel. But yes, the first Jack Frost, he's just a homicidal snowman. And yes, they made a sequel where he has a bunch of small snowman children. Well worth watching. It's amazing.
Yeah, but that was the beauty of it. And you can really never go wrong. I mean, I don't really remember, certainly not when I was younger. When we got a little bit older and we were going to Blockbuster, I know John and I and our friend Jay, we would spend literally an hour walking up and down the aisles, just be like, it was almost like too many choices, but at the same time, not enough. Because again, like we talked about earlier, some of those more esoteric titles were not there. So you had a bunch of direct-to-video selections like your Jack Frost or what have you. And it's like, do we really want to check this out? It really doesn't look good, but we couldn't really find anything else that we could agree on that we all wanted to see. So then it was like, all right, let's just get it because we've been here for an hour already. It's already 11 o'clock and we got to watch the damn thing. So let's just grab it and go. So I remember being not really upset, not really angry, but, kind of faux anger at plunking down our good money for a turkey like that. Whereas when I was younger, even if it was a bad movie, there was still that collective, like you were watching it usually with a bunch of friends. It was more about just being with the friends, and if it was bad, you were all experiencing that bad movie together. And if it happened to be like a good sci-fi horror action, because that's typically what we rented, then all the better for it. And you found this new movie that became your favorite or became a cult hit, or something like Big Trouble in Little China, something like The Thing, that has now carried its way forward 20, 30 years to where we are now, and you still have fond memories of watching them, and you can go back and get something new out of it, but you're also tied to that moment in time when you saw that with your friends because you just decided on a whim that today was the day we're going to rent this out of the video store.
Those are the best video store memories for sure.
Absolutely.
All right, what do you think?
I don't know. I mean, I'm enjoying talking video store memories. I don't know how many more video store memories I have, but
no, I think that's good. I'm good if you are.
Yeah, I think I got to everything that I had on my little list here. So
okay. That's it for this episode. Tune in next time for more fan-to-fan conversations on the Fan-to-Fan podcast. Thanks for listening.
A tale of terror that will leave you limp. So hideous and shocking, you won't believe your eyes. His hunger for victims was never satisfied.